Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Between the Vines. I am Jennifer Phillips Russo, the Cornell Viticulture Extension Specialist, here with my co host, Andrew Holden, who is our Penn State University Business Management Specialist. And we have a special guest with us today, Dr. Terry Bates. He's not he's been here often with us, but he's always special when he shows up and shares his information. He's the director of the Cornell Lake
Special,
Erie
all right.
Special, all right. He's the director of the Cornell Lake Erie Research and Extension Laboratory in Portland, New York. Hi, Terry. Thanks for joining.
Hello.
Hi, Andrew.
Hey.
It's going to be hard for all of us to get words in on this one, but this is really important information that Terry is joining with us today because many of you are aware. Let me tell you that today's date is June 5th, 2025. We are approaching bloom in our region. And many of you are aware, if you've been listening to our podcast, that we have experienced a very hefty frost last year where our yields were extremely low. The vines, it was a beautiful growing season. The vines were rested and set up this year for a pretty large crop, judging by what I'm looking at out there. So we want to talk about crop estimation and why that's important. So I'm going to actually let Terry take it away because you have done a ton of good research on crop estimation.
So thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me here. And yeah, so we usually talk hand in hand about crop estimation and crop thinning. And I know there are still growers out there for viticulture reasons and or economic reasons that they're like, I'm not going to thin my grapes. But I do think whether or not, I always say I'm indifferent on whether you thin or not. We have done crop load models for Concord. We kind of know what our yield to pruning weight ratio targets should be, and you can estimate that, and you can say I'm going to thin to vine balance or not. So I'm indifferent on whether you thin or not, but it would really help to know what you have in the vineyard. So improving our crop estimation alone just gives you more information on, ideas on should I thin or not, or this is the crop I have and my crop is low on one side in one vineyard and it's high in another vineyard. And that gives me information about like what I can think about in terms of what field I'm going to pick first when it comes time for harvest, and what you should be looking for. So
also implications of vine health. So there is a potential for there to be a large crop out there. And if you're going to try to ripen that during our growing season, nobody knows what our growing season. Last year was beautiful. A couple of years before that, it rained the entire time. So it's sort of also a risk management tool to maybe take some of that off. Knowing what you
right.
have to start.
Right. So again, this rolls into the Concord crop load model. So you look at the yield to pruning weight ratio, or what we call Ravaz index, and we have, and I'll show in a second, like what values you should be looking for. And I forgot what I was going to say.
That's how this goes.
Cut that out of the blooper reel.
There's so much good information in there.
Yeah. So the way we normally do crop estimation, and so we've been doing this for a long time, is you just subsample your vineyard at 30 days after bloom. Okay. Oh, I know what I wanted to say is so our first indication on like, should you be thinning or not, or what kind of crop you could hang in a particular year really starts with bloom date. So that we use the growing degree day accumulation in Lake Erie on May 1st. So throughout the month of April, we look at the accumulation in the lake, and on May 1st, we make a prediction on when bloom's going to be. And we said this year is going to be around June 10th, June 11th, which does put us early. So June 16th is our long-term average. From pruning studies that we've done in the past, what I always refer to as a juice quality study, we came up with a rule of thumb that for every 3 days early you are on bloom, it's 1 more ton per acre you could ripen in that given year, based on like what your average yield is. So like everybody knows, oh, I have a vineyard. It's an 8 ton per acre vineyard. So like on an average year, I can ripen 8 tons, and I don't like to take a big hit on pruning weight or anything. They're not overcropped. At 8 tons, that's a pretty good vineyard. So I know in a year like this, where we're going to be 3 days or so early on bloom, I could ripen 9 tons in that vineyard. So when you do your crop estimate and you say, oh, I have, you know, 8 to 9 tons in this vineyard, I'm not going to touch it. If I have 12 to 13 tons per acre in this vineyard, I'm going to want to thin it down to like 9. So based on that, and we are at, as of today, I think we said we're about 6 flat leaves, and a flat leaf on a shoot is any leaf that's more than a centimeter in size is considered a flat leaf. We're at 6, and bloom usually happens at 9. So we have 3 more leaves to go,
Mhm.
which should happen in the next week. Plus, we were getting reports that people are seeing wild grape bloom happening near their vineyard. So that gives us 5 days. So whatever, 5 days from now is going to be June 10th.
Your prediction.
Yeah. So we do all this stuff to try to predict when bloom's going to be, when it really doesn't matter, because bloom's going to happen when bloom's going to happen, and then at 30 days after bloom, we crop estimate and decide whether we're going to thin or not.
But that's important is to know what your bloom date is because of crop estimation and the work that you've done with the Concord berry curve.
Yes, and I will say everything I'm going to talk about in terms of bloom date in comparison earlier years or berry curve comparison to other years, it's all done here at Clairol. So it's just a reference point. What happens in your vineyard, you may bloom earlier or later than we do. Your berry curve might be a little bit different than ours. So this just you're just using the lab as a reference, and the reference is really good in going back and comparing other years. But like what happens on your farm is really important, and I would encourage everybody to take these kind of measurements on their own farm.
I second that, by the way. And there will be a crop update going out today in regards to making sure you record that.
Yep. Okay. Man, I hope almost everybody, at least our Concord growers, have heard me talk about crop estimation and thinning in the past.
Most of the people around here are, but I do have to
Yeah,
tell you, we have quite the following that is expanded out from
right,
this area as well. So it's still relevant to them about making sure you're taking all of those viticulture measurements and seeing
right.
trends over time.
So, okay, so this whole thing started with Bob Poole back in whatever, the 1990s on crop estimation and using the berry curve on crop estimation. So every year at Clairol, we collect a standard berry curve. So we have a phenology block. We collect berries, every week or so throughout the season, and we measure that fresh berry weight curve. And Bob Poole would say that at 1,200 growing degree days after bloom, the berries are 50% of their final weight. And that turns out to be right around 30 days after bloom. So, I mean, there's a little slop in there, but I think it's easy. It's easier for me, and I think most growers to say, oh, I scouted my vineyard. This was my bloom date, and I just count ahead 30 days.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you just for the purpose of knowing when to call bloom is when 50% of your clusters are at 50% bloom, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wanted to make sure everybody has that so they're like, oh, there's one cluster in there that's got flowers. We're bloom.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't look at the little shoot down by the ground that blooms early.
Right.
Yeah, you're talking about 50%, what we call 50% bloom. You're like in full bloom. And in most years in our area, we kind of go in and out of bloom fairly quickly. So that's usually not a big deal. There are some years where bloom starts and it turns cold and rainy, and then bloom can last. Yeah, it can last, yeah, over a week. And then that gives us problems in other ways. Um, when I talk to viticulturists from other regions, I usually talk about how our season is very compressed, right? We're in a more northern um, latitude, longitude, latitude. So, we get in the winter, we have short days, and in the summer, we have long days, and the vines are responding to that day length cue. And we have a short season, so 180 frost-free days. So you compare that with, say, Central or Southern California, where they don't get the long day, short night in there. They're closer to the equator, so their the phases of vine growth tend to be more drawn out and overlap. So like their bloom periods can be much longer. So then that leads to differences in like fruit set and berry weight, and it just causes like a whole other level of variation that we tend not to have. Like we can get in and out of bloom really quick. So like picking when your 50% bloom date was not that big of a deal. If it gets cold and rainy, it just yeah, it just causes another level of error in our estimate.
I'm hoping we have cold and rainy out of the way now and we can just be nice weather from this.
Looking good, looking good. So, okay, the traditional way that we've done the crop estimation thing is you wait till 30 days after bloom, you go out and you clean pick 1% of an acre, either by hand or with a machine. You weigh that fruit, you double the weight, and that's what your prediction is at harvest. And, you know, that's the way to do it. You can change the date at which you could be at 35 days after bloom or 40 days after bloom, and that's where that chart comes in that we made way back in 2003, saying, if I'm at 30 days or if I'm at 40 days after bloom, I'm some percentage of final berry weight, and my multiplication changes to give me what my predicted final is going to be.
It's important to also know so a little more information about your vineyard blocks, and that would be like your row spacing.
Right, right. So all of that gets factored into like, here I'm picking this sample at 30 days after bloom. What percentage of that is of an acre and what percentage are we at of final berry weight? And it's just math to figure out what it is. So we built a calculator um, that just so somebody asked me at this year's grower conference, said, can you change that chart every year based on the season that we're having? And so I said, okay, let me try to build like a robust calculator. So you go in, you type in your stuff, and it spits out like what your crop estimate is, what your crop load is, and a recommendation on if you should thin or not. So here, let me share my screen.
Please share your screen. And while you're
Yep.
working on that, he's going to walk through the calculator for us. So if you are listening to this as a podcast, please note that every single one of these are also a what do you want to call it? Video blog that we put on our YouTube channel. So you can actually go back and see how he walked through it.
So okay, so the first thing is, where do you go pick your samples? We used to just treat every block as a uniform block, and I'd collect so many samples in a block and get what is the weight of that 1% of an acre in that particular block. Now we direct our samples based on some spatial data. So this is an NDVI scan of our vineyard that we did 2 weeks ago. So this is an early season NDVI that relates well with shoe count and cluster count. So that's kind of my first indication of what my crop size might be. Anyways, we look at a map and then we select the points where we want to do our field validation. So this is what the points I went out and I collected cluster counts. But we do the same thing. I take a bloom time scan, and that pattern ends up relating the best with our yield pattern in the vineyard. So I will use that pattern to select where I want to sample. So I'll take some high spots, I'll take some medium spots, and I'll take some low spots. And that's where I'll do my 1% of an acre, clean pick it, weigh the fruit, and double the weight in that area. And that'll be the crop prediction for that zone in the vineyard.
May I interrupt just for one moment?
Yep.
And I think you can get the same results even if you aren't adopting NDVI scans. Our area, because of all the fantastic work that you're doing, has a lot of adoption. But even in our area, many of our growers don't. But they still know where those high, medium, and low vine sizes are.
Right.
So,
Yes. Agreed.
okay.
Yeah, you don't need all the fancy technology and spatial data. This just helps you, especially if you have large acreage with a lot of variation, to
Right.
really go in there and hone in on your numbers. It just makes the whole thing more accurate. Okay, so what about a tool? If you go to Efficient Vineyard, the website, you go to my viticulture blog page. So I got all sorts of articles on there about all different stuff that we're doing. And one of the most recent ones is this Concord crop estimation calculator. and you can pull it up on your phone when you're out in the field or collect numbers in the field and be at your desk. So this takes into account all your stuff about vine spacing, how many days after bloom you are. So it's looking at the average berry curve, um, and where you are in relation to bloom, as in what percent of final berry weight you are, and it just does the calculations for you already. So it's basically taking that chart that everyone's been using for years, and it puts it into an online calculator that you can just have with you out in the field. Uh,
I would just like
but
to add, um, and I'm sorry for interrupting you. I do have growers call me a lot because particularly they have 500 acres that they have to get through. And a lot of this happens at the same time. So they're like, Jen, what if I'm 55 days after? What if I'm, this
right,
calculator takes that into account.
right, right. So I have some default values in here. So when you pull up the calculator, this is what it should look like. I mean, it's saying I have 8.3 tons per acre, but I haven't taken any data yet. Um, so you put in your row and vine spacing. So say you're at 8.5 by 8. Some of our new vineyard spacings are at that closer row spacing because we're putting the metal post at every vine and it's easier to get down the row. I don't know, say I'm at 35 days after bloom. I can have the option of saying I'm going to collect fruit weight off of individual vines, which is typically done manually. I mean, there's a lot of growers who say, I'm not going to pull out my harvester this time of year to go out and collect a couple samples. Um, they want to just go out with a bucket and a scale and go hand pick some vines. So, and you can choose the number of vines that are in your sample. You can do as many as you want or as few as you want. It'll work with as little as one vine. So, say we just
I
went out sample.
recommend one vine, Dr. Bates.
Do I recommend one vine? Absolutely not. The reason we pick 1% of an acre, which is roughly at 9 by 8 spacing, is roughly 6 vines. So there's a lot of vine to vine variation in the field. I mean, and most growers observe this. I may have a big vine next to a medium sized vine, next to a big vine, and the next one's small. So you're kind of trying to get what's the average in this sample, right? The better the sample, garbage in, garbage out. If you get a nice clean sample, it's giving you information that you can use. If you just use one vine, what if you just happen to pick the small vine or just happen to pick the excessively large vine for the population in the area? But okay, let's just say for this particular example, I picked one vine and I don't know, I picked 20 pounds of fruit off of it. That means I have 11.1 tons per acre because I'm at 8.5 by 8 spacing. 35 days after bloom, I picked one vine, I picked 20 pounds of fruit off of that vine. It's telling me I have 11.1 tons per acre in that sample equivalent.
So what if
Um,
you just quickly, for the sake of it, can you put in you got 10 pounds? Obviously, it's going to have it, but
so 5.5 tons per acre, right? So let's go back to our 20 pounds because that's a decent yield at 11 tons per acre. So this is where the Ravaz index thing comes in. Now you have to tell me what do you think the pruning weight is in that area. And again, you could take pruning weight either last winter or next winter I mean, you can't take it next winter and use it in this calculator because it hasn't happened yet. But just in general, like, oh, I'm in a section of my vineyard where I have 3 pound vines, or I'm in a section of my vineyard where I have 1 pound vines. So say you're in a kind of a weak section of your vineyard, right? So I'm hanging 11 tons per acre equivalent harvest weight on a 1 pound vine. So it's overcropped. The Ravaz index is 35.
whoa.
So, and so I give a little scale here, 0 to 5 is severely undercropped, right? That's growing, no offense to anybody in Oregon, but this is growing Pinot Noir in Oregon, where they're growing 2 tons per acre on pretty vigorous vines. So they're undercropping their vines. They could crop more and still have the same quality. Although a lot of people would disagree with me on that statement. 5 to 10 is undercropped. 10 to 15 is balanced for Concord, I'm talking about. 15 to 20, you're pushing it.
I love that you wrote that in there too.
Yeah.
And 20 to 25 is overcropped, and greater than 25 is severely overcropped. And really, what does that mean is if you're above a crop load of 15, you're going to see a hit to bricks and you're going to start seeing a hit to pruning weight. The more and more overcropped you are, the harder, the longer you're going to have to wait to harvest your fruit, and you're going to have a decrease in pruning weight, which is going to decrease your crop potential for next year. So that's that whole idea of balance. And the economics come into play here where it's, I had a frost last year and my crop was low. I was undercropped. I gained pruning weight. I gained crop potential. I'm setting a big crop this year. I'm broke. So I'm gonna hang it. So, and we're a little early on bloom. So to me, if you're in that 15 to 20 range and you're saying, okay, you're pushing it, but I would push it this year. That's just me. You make your own decision. But even on a year like this, if I'm above 20 on my crop load, I'm going to be thinking about maybe shaking some of that fruit off so I don't really hurt my vines. So anyways, if so, if I'm hanging 11 tons per acre on a 1 pound vine, that's not good. That's 35. And it'll tell you your thinning consideration. You should think about thinning off 6.3 tons per acre. That's equivalent weight at harvest. So it'd be like 3.15 tons per acre now, like at thinning time. Right? Divide that by 2.
Yeah. Do you well I know that there are a lot of factors that every grower needs to put into this. Do you think thinning 6.3 tons per acre is a good thing?
No.
Like, yeah,
But
I don't
those
either.
vines
That's
are
why
really
I was
sick.
yeah.
Yeah, so usually we say you kind of want to be in that range of 2 to 3 tons per acre. Like I'm thinning off 2 to 3 tons per acre, equivalent harvest weight. If you're thinning off a lot, have to thin off a lot, like you've made a mistake and now you're trying to correct it, and you kind of have to beat the vines up to get that much crop off. Um, let's see.
What if you had 2.5 pound vines?
Okay, let's just go with 2 pound vines. Let's see. What if you had 2 pound vines? Now your Revaz index is 17, and you're in that, I'm pushing it a little, 11 tons per acre on 2 pound vines. Yeah, I'm pushing it. I I would probably not thin.
Well, it even suggests your thinning consideration says 1.5
Yeah, I mean,
tons.
so on an average year, it would say thin off a ton and a half, and I would be okay with that. It's easy to take that amount off. You're not hurting the vines. You're just shaking a little fruit off. I'd probably shoot for like the 2 ton per acre, like 2 to 3 tons per acre, just so my Revaz index was getting down to like 15, and that fruit's gonna ripen, and I'm not gonna hurt my pruning weight at all, so that I can come back with a crop next year. But again, we're a little early on bloom. People are hurting for money. If I'm in you're pushing it range, it's your decision. It's your business, not mine.
I can hear Andrew on the side going, surplus, surplus. I can feel it. We've had
Yeah, okay. Now, yes, that's a business decision that
Yeah.
growers need to consider on, uh, you know, are they in the whatever they call it, inventory management program? So they're only going to take some percentage of your long term. Is that going to happen? Um, that all factors into it. I mean, so again, if I'm hanging 11 tons per acre and I'm between a 1 and a 2 pound vine and I'm a bit overcropped, but I know I'm not gonna be able to deliver all the fruit anyways, go ahead and thin it, and
well,
the rest
sorry, go ahead.
save, yeah, then you're gonna help your sugar, you're gonna help your pruning weight, you're gonna help next year's yield.
Yeah, I think this is an important tool for folks to help mitigate risk. And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do is not yo-yo between high years and low years, but to keep those vines balanced so that we
Yeah.
have consistency and healthy vines every year. And that
Yep.
way, that way, yeah, if folks are, hurting for income this year, we don't want to rob from next year or, potentially multi-years down the road. So using crop estimation and calculators like this is very helpful
Yeah.
for those decisions.
Yeah. I totally agree. If you're going to talk to whatever, Terry Bates, the viticulturist, I mean, I would say 100% every year you need to be in that 10 to 15 Rivaz index. Like,
Hmm.
and if you're over it, you should thin. And
Yeah.
if you need to gain, like say you're in a vineyard that always struggles and the pruning weight's a little low, and it's like no matter what I do, I really can't get the pruning weight up. So, maybe I'm doing a better job with my floor management. Maybe I'm doing a little bit better job with my fertilizer management. And now what's the last thing is that I could reduce my crop stress and really help those vines gain pruning weight and crop potential for not just next year, but future years to come.
Hmm.
If that's the case, you want to be in the 5 to 10 or somewhere around 10 um, for your Ravaz index. And so this calculator can kind of tell you where are you and where should I be. Like the viticulturist would tell me you should be between 10 and 15. And if you got to gain pruning weight, you should be on the low end of that, like 10. And
I
if it's early bloom and I'm hurting for money and I have a place to sell my crop, I would probably be in the you're pushing it range this year.
So this might be outside of my range, and with the two viticulturalists here, it may be a question from someone that's less experienced. But I've heard growers um, have mentioned strategies of if they have multiple vineyards, you know, overcropping some of their vineyards and undercropping some of them, and rotating that as a way to not only manage yield and try and even out yield, but also harvesting times. How does that come in to play, I guess, when doing crop estimation, and maybe educate me on the advantages or disadvantages of
Oh,
that. Or is that
Well,
too deep?
no,
Is that too deep to talk about today? I don't know.
yeah. No, I mean, I think that that's using crop estimation and thinning to its fullest. I mean, there are some
Okay.
growers that will, yep, I mean, they set up a whole like processing line during in the loading area, and they're testing every box, or well, now that it's bulk, they're testing every bulk bin that's coming in, and they're, figuring out, you know, they do a really good job maximizing their profit margins that way.
Hmm.
and
Um,
you're right, Andrew, because if you do have a percentage of your acreage that you have thinned and you have fewer buds left on it, you will probably have higher sugars in those areas at the end of the season. So they
Hmm.
do play that little bit of that game of, and it was funny when we were at a program last week, we had one of our bigger processors admit that. And I said, "Are you admitting blending out loud?" And it was like, everybody does it. I would like to just add, actually, this information that Terry is talking about and the fact on how to do this. And because I do know growers out there are scared. They're scared to do the fruit thinning because they're, number one, afraid they're going to take too much off, or
Hmm.
they don't exactly
yep.
know how to go about doing it. So we are going to have a program on July 16th at Clairol in Portland, New York. Clairol is the Cornell Lake Erie Research and Extension Laboratory. And Terry is going to talk in depth about, we do like a little classroom style first, where we learn about the research and why we make these decisions. And then we're going to go out and have a demo in our vineyards out back on how to do that. Do you want to speak to that at all, Terry? Because I know even in our meeting this we had this morning with some industry representatives, they were admitting that growers are scared to do this. How do you like talk them off of the ledge and say,
Oh, I think with any new practice, anything that comes out of the research program, like you never just go and do it to your whole farm. Like you don't know how, just because we research something at the research farm, and we do it over and over, and it's like, okay, this is the technique, this is how it works on our farm. Like our farm is different than your farm, and your management style is different than ours. it's like this is a potential thing that could work for you. Okay, so take a small section of your vineyard and try it out. Like do your own experimentation. Growers are very inquisitive as it is, so I think it, there have been horror stories in the past where somebody at Cornell recommends something and then somebody goes and does it to their entire farm and it doesn't work. And that's not a good situation for anybody. So um, and any grower in our area can talk to you or talk to me about like, okay, how would you go about setting up this on your farm? Maybe on a little bit larger acreage, but okay, here's, make sure that you have a representative section that say you don't thin, and then one maybe you thin a little off, and another section you thin off more, but just do it in a controlled way of, don't go out there and say, oh, I thinned these couple rows, but I forgot what rows they were. I don't know what happened. And then like you don't get anything out of it at the end. Everyone's busy at harvest time. So it's just take a little time to set up the trial, make sure you either note where the rows are or flag them out and so that you can actually see what the response is at the end of the season. And that's and talk to your other growers. There's a lot of growers in our area that have a lot of experience with this. Some of them have been thinning for more than 25 years.
Right.
And and
Like
yeah,
how
and
fast to drive and what percent is your shaker speed at, or like these are the questions that I think growers are going to be coming with at this demonstration that we're doing.
yeah, yeah. So, and we learn this every time we go into a new vineyard and or a new variety. Uh, y- just be prepared to sacrifice a row or two, which is no big deal.
It doesn't have to be a
Uh,
lot, right? That's what I was
it
trying to
doesn't
get.
have to be a lot, and just it pays to spend a day or two. You thin some, you weigh, you thin, you weigh, you thin, you weigh, you thin, you weigh. You just keep at it until you're confident of okay. I'm going this ground speed at this shaker head speed, and I'm taking off about 10% of my crop. That's about where I want to be, something like that. And then you can go and do a larger portion of your acreage. Um, yeah.
Well, these
The
are tools that
the
you
I'll tell
learn.
you, yeah, and I think most growers who are experienced in this will tell you the lifting up the canopy and looking does not work. Whether that's straight off crop estimation, I lift up the canopy, I look to see how much fruit is there, and be like, yeah, it's about 8 tons per acre. That that doesn't work. And then if you try to thin off and you're like, oh, I'm taking off about 10%, and you're like, ends up being you're taking off a lot more than you thought you did. Taking off a ton of fruit, shaking it on the ground almost looks like nothing, which is that throws people a little bit. They're like, oh, I thinned some off, but I don't see any on the ground, so I need to thin more. And then they end up, by the time they're satisfied with what's on the ground, they've taken off too much.
Have you ever done that? Have you ever taken photos? And that would be interesting
Yes.
for people to see. Oh, cool.
Yeah, somewhere.
That would
Over
be
the years, we've taken pictures. We've even done stuff where we laid out plastic, and tried to catch what was on the floor after the thinning's gone through. That was a pain.
I think that's really cool though that you have that, because that might be why people take too much off, the way you were saying, is the eyeball just doesn't say, oh, that's a ton.
Yeah, then yes, another thing that comes up always is what's the fudge factor of what is damaged in the canopy that doesn't get caught by the harvester during the thinning process. So so some growers have a magic number in their vineyard that they use to say, oh, I wanted to take off 2 tons per acre, but I know it's really going to be 2.5 tons per acre, something like that. And I think that is getting less and less with the better machines and the better, more experienced drivers. So when we first started doing this with the Chisholm Rider harvester and the beater bars were not in sync, it was a lot of slapping. So you were damaging fruit and raguses and shoots. It was
That's
causing a lot of damage. So, and then a lot of it would get hung up in the canopy. And so there was this fudge factor of I took off this much fruit and that's what I caught and weighed, but what's still left in the canopy?
mm,
And I think now that is a lot less. So now with our newer harvesters and when you can tighten up the throat or the beater bars, the throat the vines go down and you can grip and shake the vines, it's causing a lot less of that breakage and a lot less damage to the berries. So that fudge factor goes way down.
Nice. There was something else I was just thinking about what you were saying that was talks amongst yourselves for a minute.
Yeah.
So, so I had a question or maybe something that I don't know if we wanted to touch on this either, but a little while ago, Terry, you shared with me your video on my EV on variable rate thinning,
Yep.
and maybe you want to touch on that and share that technology because
Yeah.
that's even more
So,
advanced.
right. And that, when I said you got to count and weigh or whatever, like pick and weigh, pick and weigh, pick and weigh until you
Yeah,
you feel like you're in the right spot, that's on steroids.
yeah.
Um, so the so we essentially map a vineyard. So we get the spatial variation of a vineyard, and I know I have big vines on one side of the vineyard, medium size, and then small size vines in another. And I crop estimate in those different areas, and I calculate a crop load, a predicted crop load for those
Mhm.
different regions. And so, like a lot of times, it's the big vines with the big crop that are balanced, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to let those ride. Those are the ones that are going to make me my money. But then in this
Mhm.
other area, I have small vines and they're carrying too big of a crop. Say maybe it's only 6 tons per acre, but it's too much for those small vines. And those are the ones I need to thin. So I may have one area of the vineyard I want to take off zero fruit. And then as I move down the row, I move into some other vines maybe want to take off a little bit. And then I get these small vines I want to take off a lot more.
Mhm.
So we make a prescription map of no thinning, some thinning, and a lot of thinning. And you have to change the beater rod speeds to like nothing all the way up to, something that's going to take off the amount of fruit that we want. And we do a lot of testing. We do a lot of like, what's the response of the small vines to thinning? What are the response of the big vines to thinning? So we can dial
Mhm.
in what those RPMs are. And when I'm satisfied with that, I dial that into the prescription map, and then whoever's driving the harvester just goes, and the beater bars will either speed up or slow down depending on what section of the field we're in. And the way that works is for us, we put into an ag leader system, and which is talking to the flow controller, which is talking to a PWM valve, which is controlling the beater speeds. So we can speed up and slow down just on.
That was a
Yeah,
really
you're,
good segue into what my question was is we do have a lot of growers who put this into practice and do it the variable rate that you're talking about. And I think that people would be shocked, which is why I want you to say, to hear what percentage you come in as yield as to what you've crop estimated. So before I know when I started in my position, it was like a 20% variability. You could have 20% higher or lower of what that crop estimation was. They wanted to bring it down under 10, under 7 really. And with
yeah,
Terry's work that he's been doing in grower adoption, I'm so impressed with where the numbers are, but I'm going to let you tell everybody where you come in.
yeah. You usually cite numbers that are lower than what we actually get. So, so I've always been like I love it when the industry sets a very measurable goal in front of us, and then we can do the research, say this is my target, this is my target. And the industry has always said they want to be within 5% of their actual, they want their crop prediction to be 5% of their actual yield. And so the first thing I always say is, are you talking about industry wide, or are you talking about my individual farm? I always approach things from the grower perspective. Like, this is my
Mhm.
farm. I want to know I'm gonna harvest X number of tons, and I want to be within 5% of that prediction. And using all our techniques now, the using NDVI at bloom, sampling at 30 days after bloom, making a crop prediction, and then coming up with an actual spatial yield map, predicted yield map, and comparing that to our actual yield map at harvest, we are pretty consistently in that 5% range. Like, I mean, I think we've achieved that goal at the farm level. The problem with the industry level thing is now you layer on top of that the management of 700 different growers.
Right.
And those things are, that's just another lever that's getting pulled that adds variation to what that crop estimation is. So I know like the work that some of the larger processors groups are doing now, trying to tackle crop estimation from like an industry-wide perspective, is it's a great it's a challenging goal. I applaud them for going after it, and we try to help with what we do research-wise with them on that question. But it's a challenging question just because every farm is different. And,
Yeah,
and
if
it's
every grower employed your techniques of the crop estimation and using of this calculator and consistently came in at 5% of what their blocks that they were putting their crop estimation at, right? Then we would have a
in theory, yes. I've said that for years. If we could just get all the growers to do it, you're probably gonna be the closest you're ever gonna get on crop estimation from an industry perspective. But it's just, it's just too difficult. Some of our growers, they're just getting more and more. I mean, 400 acres, 500 acres is, it's tough to nail it down at that size.
but we should say that just our acreage is not shrinking. Our number of growers are. So
Yes.
yeah, that should be
Right. So individual operations are getting larger, and that it just yeah, and those good growers are just becoming really good managers of that acreage.
well, I think you're being quite humble. I think the research that you're doing in this area has really held that. So kudos to you. He won't do that himself. And we have to do it for him. So thank you for all the work that you've
It's
done.
all about science and the number. It's all about math. Uh,
Science.
and no, and I think it's. I mean, when I started, it was the goal always was, we want average yields of 8 to 10 tons per acre of 16 brick fruit. And I think largely we've achieved that as an industry. And now as we move forward with, you know, new technology and larger farms, like what are those concrete goals that we should be after as a research team?
I agree. And we're getting to that. Lots of conversations with people.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
things. Andrew, was there anything that you wanted to add? This has been a really good discussion.
No, yeah. All I was going to say was I agree, and from my perspective, where I see it going is, the high tech and, mechanization and autonomous, like the variable rate fruit thinning, those things I think are, what's on the horizon, just helping growers, do a better job, manage those high acreages.
Yep.
I agree. Well, thank you for taking your time. Please, if you want
Yep.
to learn more about this and how to put it into practice, consider joining. It is a free program that we put out thanks to the generosity and getting the research out there of Dr. Terry Bates. It's on July 16th at the Cornell Lake Erie Research and Extension Laboratory. It's going to be a Clairol demo day of doing crop estimation and then how to thin using the mechanical harvester. So.
And we were showing the MyEV website with the calculator on there, but there's a couple other good calculators, a lot of good videos, a lot of
Yep.
really cool information on there on the blog site. So definitely check that out if you're interested in this stuff.
And stay tuned for our next episode. That is going to be on here, a fertilizer calculator that you have out there.
Yep.
See how that all rolls in.
Cliffhanger.
And then we'll have to do it. We'll have to do another one because this week, working with Yuzhong and Lynn Sosnowski, we did autonomous variable sucker control on grapevines in one of our research plots. So we have an autonomous robot, autonomous tool carrier. We have Lynn Sosnowski is working with this Weed It sprayer. And what we do is we have it pointed at the suckers, so it's not continuously spraying herbicide the whole time. It just sees a sucker and sprays it, and goes to the next vine, sees a sucker and sprays it, and it's doing. The robot did it all by itself on an acre of grapes. So
Wow.
we're just starting, but it's going that way.
Cutting down on herbicide use and costs, right? Well, I suppose we have to factor in the cost of the robot and all of that, but I believe should pay for itself after a while.
Yeah, but you don't have the labor to do the sucker spraying. You don't have, you know, a big ass tractor.
What?
You don't have a big you don't have a big tractor carrying a little tank of spray. You have a little robot carrying a little tank of spray. You
Mhm.
don't have exposure to the operator because the robot's
Mhm.
out there doing it. It
Right. That
so a lot of good stuff.